Okay, hi everybody. My name is Richard.lesperance. I go by the name of my man Richard. Welcome to A Better Lifestyle. Today I have the pleasure to have Joh Hewitt. Welcome, John, to the podcast.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Great. So, John, tell us a little bit about your story and we'll get started.
Yeah, I've been in business for 55 years. Started when I was at the University of Buffalo working part-time for H&R Block. Loved it. 12 years later, I was running 250 H&R Block locations. My dad, CFO of a public company, he decided we should computerize tax. And so we built in 1981 the first tax software for an Apple computer. No one wanted it, way ahead of its time. We got blessed and found a company in Virginia Beach called Mel Jackson Tax Service. Mel had died. We bought 6 offices from his widow, merged the 2 companies, changed the name to Jackson Hewitt. We went public, and 15 years later, sold it for $483 million. I had a 3-year non-compete, but it didn't cover Canada. And having grown up in Buffalo, I knew the Canadian tax system. So we opened Liberty Tax in Canada. And within 3 years, became a top 100 retail chain in Canada. And when my non-compete ended in 2000 in the United States, came back to the United States. And now I had to compete against my own name, my own software, my own system, 3,000 Jackson Hewitt offices. And not only did we go faster than them, we grew faster than them and H&R Block combined. We opened 4,000 offices in 12 years, top 10 fastest growing franchisor ever. Again, public company worth $500 million. Again, I sold my stock and started Loyalty Brands. And Loyalty Brands has 8 different brands, and we focus on 3 different industries. One is tax and accounting. Secondly is construction, led by our roofing, solar, siding. And the fastest growing is our mobile grooming, which is Zoom Grooming. And we're already the largest mobile grooming in the United States. So that's my 55-year career.
So, how was your experience in the first 2 businesses, like the journey and the process?
It was lengthy. The first one was 15 years. The second one was 20. And it was a great adventure. You know, when I was young, I thought I'd get rich and just retire early. And I was cocky and realized, though, that during the journey is the joy. The treasure at the end of the rainbow, at the end of 15 years or 20 years, is anticlimactic. It's really the journey. And so, and it's full of struggle. There's no school in the world that I know of that teaches you to be a CEO. So I've been in the school of hard knocks for the last 42 years, learning how to be a CEO.
Okay. And why did you go public?
Both times we went public, we had large investors, and I started both companies with investors, and each time we took on private equity and venture capital. And when you have large investors like that, they're looking for liquidity, and they're looking to exit. Their typical time frame is about 5 to 7 years before they want to exit. So each time it was from pressure of the investors who wanted to be able to sell their stock. Neither time did we take money for the company. We just enabled our investors to get liquidity and sell their stock.
And what's the process if someone wants to bring their company for the company to be public?
Yeah, the standard process is you get an investment banker and hire attorneys, and they put a book together, and then they take you on a roadshow. And the roadshow generally is a week or 2, depends how big you are. If you're big enough, they'll take you to Europe as part of the process. And if you're really huge, they may even take you to Asia as part of the process. But It's typically a 1, 2, or 3 week roadshow where you just meet with investors after investor and look for offers on your stock.
What would you say is the advantages and disadvantages?
The number one advantage is liquidity. That when you have a private company and you are a minority investor, it's extremely difficult to monetize that and to be able to sell your stock as necessary. And most people aren't ready to make a 10, 20, 30-year investment. They want to be in and out within a few years or certainly less than 10 or 20 years. So the number one thing is liquidity. And the bad news is it was a lot easier in the 20th century before Sarbanes-Oxley. But once we hit the 21st century and Sarbanes-Oxley came into play, boy, is it onerous to be public. We're spending hundreds of hours a year on the going public. I mean, being a public company, and it was costing us at Liberty Tax, it was costing us over $4 million a year to be a public company, all of the added expense. So it's a nuisance, and it's primarily a nuisance. But if you need liquidity, it's the way to go.
And you talked you've been working with your father in the past. So what was that like, and what did you learn from working with your father?
My father was a difficult man. He was stubborn, and when we were teenagers, in fact, we were pretty feisty. We were butted heads tremendously when I was a teenager, and it didn't change until I went into business. And then once we went into business with him, he was a different in this sense that if there was some other part in our life about talking about religion or politics, or I never could get him to change his mind, not once. And he was so stubborn, not one time. And of course, I'm like my dad, so I'm stubborn too. However, in business, he was totally different. He was a total supporter, and he would let me win on each and every discussion. So he let me run the companies. He was a founder of Hewtax, the software company. He was a director at Jackson Hewitt, and he was a director at Liberty Tax. And he would always support my decision. He would, of course, always give me his advice. And if he firmly believed, as I believe, that if both of us think the same, one of us is useless. So he was free to voice his opinions that were clashed. But at the end of the day, he would 100% support my decision. And so it turned out our relationship, which had been extremely rocky and brutal as a teenager, he turned into one of my best friends, confidants, supporters, top 5 people in my life on a business and personal level, not just a dad, but in many other capacities.
When you do business with family and friends, sometimes it could go wrong. What would you have to say to people who are fearful of doing business with their family and friends?
Yeah, if you're fearful, you probably shouldn't. At the same time as I described my great relationship with my father, I had to fire my ex-wife. I had to fire one of my sons. I had to fire one of my daughters. And it caused a rift in another one of my daughters. So it's I would say that if you're concerned about it, that's very wise. That and having brought in over 5,300 franchisees in my life, I've seen many divorces from and some of them were related to to battles about the business. And so, yeah, I would advise people generally not to go into business with family.
Mm. You talk in your book that you made some mistakes in the franchise. Talk to us about that. I think it's the second you talk about the second mistake that you made in the franchise business.
Yeah, the number two mistake I made, and of course, people that are the most successful have made the most mistakes, and so I've been blessed with tremendous success. So you're looking at one of the guys that's made more mistakes than any human being you've ever met. Because I'm old, I'm 75 years old, so I've made more mistakes than anyone you've ever met, probably. And but I made this silly mistake. The When I started, we bought 6 offices, and we had a goal to have to be bigger than H&R Block. H&R Block had 9,000 offices, so we needed to add 8,995 offices. Well, the first year we acquired 6 in August and opened in January with 11. Second January we had 15. Third January we had 22. However, at the end of 3 years, 2.5 years, that's pretty good growth to go to 6 to 22. But I realized then, if I was going to get to 9,000, I was going to be like 1,000 years old. So we had all company stores, and I said, well, H&R Block has a franchise system, and they grew to 9,000 pretty quickly. What am I doing? And I was with them when they went from 3,000 to 9,000. From 1969 to 1981, they went from 3,000 to 9,000, and it was through franchising. And so I said, what an idiot. Let's go start franchising. And we began growing exponentially after that. We went from 22 to 49 to 180, and I mean, just grew very quickly. And as I said, even at Liberty, we grew to faster than Block or Jackson Hewitt ever had. We grew to 4,000 offices in 12 years. So yeah, franchising, not doing franchising from day one was one of the biggest mistakes in my life.
Speaking about the book, what's the book all about?
The book is about the journey. I built a $1 billion business and a $500 million business. I'm the only one that's developed 2 of the top 100 retail chains in the country. And I talk about, I think the biggest compliment I've got in the book is, as you mentioned, I talk about my mistakes. I think most business books talk about their successes. I talk about overcoming adversity and the mistakes I made and how I overcame them.
Okay. And one of you talk about in one of your interviews I was listening, you talk about skin in the game. You were referring to if someone is if an entrepreneur doesn't have money to start a business and he's looking for an investor, you had a different perspective on that, the person who has no money and the person who invests. Talk to us about that.
I think this is one of the things that I agree with virtually everyone on. And although some people may convert to my thinking, but the phrase skin in the game to the normal person means cash. They have some cash invested. And I had an epiphany about a couple of years ago that no, it's not about the cash that you invest. That what skin in the game really means is that you're all in. It's what you think about day and night. It's what you're thinking about when you're in the shower, when you're exercising, when you're driving, when you're just sitting, relaxing. You're thinking about your business, and you're committed. You have your life all in. If you take a person that has very little money and they invest little or no money and they're all in, that person's going to be more committed than if you take a multimillionaire that invests $100,000. Let's say you're worth $10 million and you invest $100,000, or you're worth $20,000 and you invest $20,000. Well, you would think the person has more skin in the game because they invested $100,000, but they can walk away from that $100,000 without blinking an eye. And that person that invested 20,000, that's their whole life, and that's their whole American. That's the American dream. That's the thing that drives people is the opportunity to overcome and change their life. And I've created, out of my 5,200, 300 franchisees, I've created 1,000 millionaires, and I've taken very, very few millionaires and done nearly as well. The people that do, if I look at all the people in my life that I brought in that had a net worth of under 100,000 versus the people that had a net worth of over $1 million, the people that had a net worth of under 100,000 did far better on average than the people that were wealthier. The wealthy are more looking for a return on investment. The yet soon to be wealthy are looking at changing their lives dramatically.
What are some life lessons that you learn, lessons in life and business?
Wow, I just so many things. One of the things I learned that was very impactful. I learned it in church. There are several impactful messages that I learned in church, but one of them that comes to mind is about 30 years ago. I was sitting in church, and the minister said, "Every one of us sins every day." And my first thought was, wow, I get that I do, but he's admitting that he does. And I never heard a minister admit that. And I thought about that, and that made sense. He's a human being. And then it didn't occur to me till a couple months later. But I realized that if every human being is going to violate the 10 commandments every day or constantly, even constantly, then we have our 10 principles at I was still with Jackson Hewitt. We have our 10 principles. And that means if they're not going to listen to God, they're certainly not going to listen to anyone else like Joh Hewitt. And so that means our people are violating our principles constantly. And so we set up a culture committee to help get a better culture, and help me, because the leader's the one that's sets the example of the most principled, and then everyone follows suit. But without their help, then I was never going to be able to move in the right direction. So we created a system where we had a pad of paper, a mission of tear-off sheets, mission moments, we called them. And we listed all of our 10 principles. And at the top was a person's name. At the bottom was an explanation. So if we saw someone that met the principles and stood up and did the right thing, we would write them up and give it to him. If we saw someone that violated a principle, then we would write it up and give it to him. And it was so great to walk around the building and see so many of them the employees pin them up on or tape them up on their wall. 2/3 or 3/4 of them were positive, but some people even put on their wall the negative ones. So it was a lesson learned in there's so many lessons, and that was a valuable lesson I learned just in church. And Sam Walton said, you don't just learn from your competitors, you learn from every consumer experience. When you're in a restaurant, when you're on a plane, when you're in a hotel, even when you're in church, you're always learning. You always need to be learning to improve yourself in your business.
What would you say to someone who wants to build a franchise business?
I would say don't. It's fraught with danger. 80% of franchisors fail. The franchising is a wonderful vehicle. And I do a 1 hour mentoring show every week. And one of them, I said, it was about why you should buy a franchise versus being a mom and pop. So if you start a business you should be a franchisee. Another one was, I have a business, should I franchise? And my first answer to that always is don't, because people don't think of it as of all the failures. 80% of that franchisors fail. The people think of the successful ones, like the Liberty Tax or the McDonald's or the Holiday Inn, or I mean, just Subway. Or, I mean, they just think of the Tim Hortons. They think of the great franchises, and they don't know about all the losers. So it's very, very difficult. And Richard, they fail for one simple reason. It's almost impossible to believe that people are this dumb. But the key to franchising is creating happy, successful franchisees. And that should be obvious. If your franchisees are happy, successful, and by successful, I mean a fair return on their investment for the time and money that they invest. If they are successful and happy, you can't stop growing. You're going to grow exponentially. But if they're not, you can't grow. And most franchisors, 80% fail because they start and end with happy, successful franchisor. They want to be happy. Well, they don't understand that it starts with and ends with the franchisee. They're not happy, you're going to fail. And they take advantage of franchisees and don't do what's best for franchisees, and they fail.
So you say don't. So if someone is really hard-headed and they still want to do it, what would you say?
I'd be happy to have them give me a call, and I'll tell you why you shouldn't do it. And if you can convince me that you should, or that you listen to me and decide, well, here's the problems. 1, 2, 3. These are the problems you're going to face, and if you can handle these problems, then go for it. But if not, then I'm going to say don't go for it. It's case by case, of course, because there are successful franchises. Just keep in mind, most franchise systems fail.
Where can people find you on social media or the internet?
Yeah, I'm at loyaltybrands.com. I'm easy to find, and all of your viewers can get a free copy of my book. There's a link on loyaltybrands.com for your viewers to get a free copy of my book.